Hello, listeners. This is Jordan. I am here and joined with Doyle. We are doing a new podcast here because there are some things we got to say, and I know I got to say some things, and I'm pretty sure Doyle does too. So we've got a handful of topics that we might want to go through. We're going to see what we can get through today and what we can't. We will, I'm sure, get to next time or in a future episode, but this being a pilot episode, you know, you're gonna expect some bumps, some potentially rough traveling, but we're gonna do the best we can to keep it smooth. But yeah, with that being said, Doyle, do you want to say hello? Do you want to kick us off with some topics here?
Sure. Hi, folks. This is Doyle. This is my first podcast, as well as our first episode. So, obviously, if I stumble along the way, forgive me. But there's some things I got to say, and specifically tonight, that what I want to start with is this coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic situation that we find ourselves in. Not really from the public health perspective either. It's more just from the the perspective of how an ordinary citizen in this country specifically, but of the world, kind of interprets it and has to learn how to live within what we're facing right now. Some of the situations that we've never seen before, and I know in my lifetime.
And I think just for clarity, our accents may give it away, but this country being the United States.
Thank you. Fair point. That is one of my ethnocentricities that I have to work through. That this actually has the potential of going outside the bounds of our not just our state and area that we're in, but also the country itself. One of the things that we see a lot lately is a number of the executives or governmental executives, politicians, talking about opening back up the country and the economy, and how that there's a lot of very strong points of view on that, based on presumptions about the information. And that's the thing that I think is strongest in my mind right now is, I'm not sure that anybody knows what's real out there. We do know that the situation is terrible, and that it's a very strong contagion, and in some cases, we know that it's deadly, and that's sad, and I don't want to make light of that by any means. But the other side of it is we're taking action, or the governments have taken action based on some presumptions about the information. And I just think that there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and that's the part that's most troubling to me is no matter where you stand on the which side of the aisle that you tend to lean toward or live in, as the case may be,
or what floor.
What floor? For those that aren't, it's not a binary situation, and it obviously is not. Even with just the two aisles, there's a spectrum or a range or a matrix of thought there. But regardless which side or which perspective that you take, there's not an easy answer. Our country, the United States, and the world, is affected by this one. This is something that's the world's not seen the likes of anything like this since the last World War, in my estimation, where every country on the face of the earth is potentially affected by this situation, both from a health perspective, but also from a cultural and a economic and a social sense. It's having an effect on people, and I was reading a post on one of the social media sites from one of my contacts recently, and he was making a point about that opening up the country, or the whatever entity you might be in, because of the economy, is going to have dire consequences. But he also said being quarantined has dire consequences, and so to know which is the best direction to go, or even the timing of it, we have to have good information. And I think that's a struggle right now, is where is the good information, and what is the good information?
I think that this is interesting because you trigger some things in my thinking regarding the information, particularly that something I got to say about it. So you mentioned the word information several times, and that decisions were made, and we need more information, this, that, and the other. And I think that and again, I can only speak from my perspective, what I've read, what I've seen, and I do my best to attempt to pull from various sources, because I know that pulling reporting information, data, whatever, from a bunch of different sources is a better way to get a more realistic view than just a single source, right? If you get it from a single source, no matter how altruistic or no matter how sincere or how quote unquote good a certain source is, it's still going to be limited what perspective it can actually give you. But I want to make a distinction when you say the word information and decisions were made on information. I don't know that that's the case. Mm-hmm. I think there was some data, and I think that data was just there, and that data was either correct data, partially correct data, or maybe even incomplete data. I think it was to some degree probably incomplete data. I don't think that it was completely wrong data, right? I don't think it's complete lies. I don't think the numbers are all 100% made up. I think there's absolutely some correct data in there, but decisions were made on data, and I've lived a lot of my life professionally in information technology, and there's a difference between information and data, right? You have to apply some type of either systematic or manual analysis to data to be able to glean any actual actionable information from it. And I think that a lot of the decisions and actions that were taken based on, I won't say suspect, but incomplete data. I think at the most generous, truthful way that you can assess it is the data was at best incomplete, and decisions were made, I think, rashly based on incomplete data and not real good analysis, because we couldn't do good analysis. And I understand there's some time sensitivity to stuff, and it got us into a situation where now we have even harder decisions to make because of the I believe rash nature with which we made these initial decisions to kind of shut things down without understanding or even taking in consideration the holistic ramifications that such a widespread decision could cause.
Sure. That's a fair point and fair clarification on the words I was using. What occurs to me, and I say words, it's I guess the distinction is data are points, and they're like words, right? And when that data is assembled appropriately, it becomes information. Much like words, when they're assembled appropriately, can become a story. And I think that's a simplistic rather way to look at it. What you said from my perspective, so I can understand it. But I think you're absolutely spot on in that regard. But it makes me think about the whole concept of triage, right? Sometimes in triage, you have to make decisions that, in retrospect, might not have been the best, but they were the best at the moment.
It's tough to make optimal decisions in triage.
Right. And so I think that's probably a fair way to put what occurred in the early stages of this coronavirus situation. I'll call it first, because we didn't know it was a pandemic at first. That there was some triage decisions that had to be made, right? It's like going to the ER. They've got to decide, how do we keep you alive first? And then from there, we decide how to make your health, get you back to health, and do preventative practices and things like that afterwards. And I think that's sort of where we find ourselves right now. At least that is how it feels to me. That's not a fact-based perspective, but that's an emotional-based perspective based on seeing things around. Because I think the triage nature is somewhat over. we know more than we did before. Now it's a time to take it to the next level, which I don't, in the ER space, I don't know what they call the next step after triage, but I know there's a term for it. But where they're doing some sort of diagnosis, some further diagnosis, and that's where I think where we are. And the thing there though is that's not a singular action. And I think the challenges that I see is that there's disagreement in the country and in the world today, but specifically speaking about the United States. There's disagreement about that, and pretty strong disagreement that we should remain in triage, which is remaining in quarantine, is sort of what that would relate from my perspective, versus trying to find a way to begin to move forward out of that where it makes sense. And I think that's the key thing, and where there's still some differing opinions on where it makes sense. And yes, certain states have decided to take stronger perspectives, but they're in their own decision-making process, right? The governors and the other leaders in the states have to look at the circumstances that are within their domain. And anyway, the point being there is everyone seems to act. Most people want to act as though the answers are absolute. They're binary. They're yes or no. They're black and white. They're just on and off, and they're really not. I tend to fall in that space on this topic too, because I have some pretty strong perspectives. As has been said, and the president has said, you don't want the cure to be worse than the disease.
Sure.
And I know we're talking life versus economy, but
no. I want to stop you there, and this is where maybe we have a disagreement. The economy is life. The economy is life working out, interacting with itself, growing, expanding. That's what the economy is. And so people conflate, I think, very often, particularly, I think, a lot of the crew who would be for, 6 month, 8 month, 12-month isolation. A lot of the people who have that perspective conflate the economy with something like the stock market, or
Sure.
conflate the economy with large corporations, and that shows a very, I think, limited, not even understanding. It's a lack of understanding of what the economy is and its importance to human life generally.
Yeah, I don't think you and I disagree. I was purporting that the actors that we witness seem to act as though they believe.
Yes, and I think that's an important distinction. Is that they I won't say act like they're actually actors, but I know what you mean when you say actors. You mean entities, people, right? Just people.
Yeah,
the people
yeah.
that we see seem to. And when you say act, you don't mean act as in falsely act. You mean how they actually, what they are doing.
That's right.
Indicate that there's this binary situation of lives versus economy. And I want to take just 1 second. I don't want to hijack you too much, but
Sorry.
this kind of hits up against another point that really bothers me. Is this phrase, if it saves one life?
Right.
I absolutely detest that phrase. I hope you know that I highly respect human life. It is extremely important. And that's why that kind of a statement is very bad, because if they're using that statement for justification is terrible. Because if it saves one life, well, what if in 5 years it kills 100,000 people? What if in 5 years it kills 2 people, but it saves one life now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the kind of calculus you want to be doing with human life? No, it's not. That's a rhetorical statement, a statement on a soapbox is what that is. And honestly, it's a really vapid statement that speaks to not thinking about anything beyond the end of my nose.
Sure. Well, and it's meant to be an argument stopper too, right? It's meant to deflate someone else's perspective and point, and because who's going to argue against saving a life,
right?
And who's going to argue against saving one life? But the to your point, the equation isn't, or the calculus isn't that clear. It's not either or, right? Because we already know that just in the normal within normal influenza, right? The United States had 34,000 deaths from just the normal influenza, but people are not going crazy over that, right? If it saved one life, why wouldn't we apply? If that's the argument to be made, why wouldn't that argument be applied there? Why wouldn't it be applied to anything that is contributory to unnecessary death?
Here's a quick rebuttal to that argument from my perspective is that if it saves one life, we should do whatever it takes. Okay, well, we have facts now that we know, and we could have suspected this anyway, but we absolutely know that because of this imposed isolation, that traffic fatalities have gone down. Right. That saved way more than one life. Way sure. more than one life. Should we stop driving? Should we get rid of cars? Of course not. That makes no sense. So I mean, just it's a farcical attempt at an argument. It's not even a real attempt at an argument. I think the people that say things like that aren't even trying to argue. They're just trying to not engage, not debate, it's just an appeal to emotion is all it really is.
Sure.
But it's just really annoying that that's the level of discourse that is in the public today, and how frankly childish that kind of statement and perspective is. And I'm not trying to be mean by saying that. That's really the reasoning of a child.
Sure. Right. It's I guess in a vernacular, it's pitching a fit.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I understand the desire to save lives. I have that desire. Sure. People, more people are going to die of suicide, starve to death, get angry because they can't have an effective life and take that anger out on other people violently and in other ways. There's just so many other things that kind of statement is ignoring that are going to be caused by this sort of a situation.
And not trying to go down another path right now, but that reminded me of something that I just heard recently, that the domestic abuse and child abuse reports have gone down drastically. And there was a local children's services worker was being interviewed on the television, and they said that they don't believe that the actual events are going down, just that the typical reporters are not seeing the children. Albeit, that is school teachers and care providers, because now the schools, have shut down, and the children are staying at home with the abusers and the perpetrators, and there's no one there, or insufficient amount of observation. And so, to your point about protecting a child, what else? I mean, there's not much more important than protecting a child from something like that.
Right,
and protecting their lives too.
And taking it back to the point of, if it saves one life, or okay, well, let's say we save somebody's life who's mid-30s, right? And so that they've got half their life to live at least, or something like that. And then we save that, but we put this kind of a situation on children, and there's 100 children who live beyond this, but they are so psychologically scarred because of what they had to endure, because they were forced through this kind of a situation.
Sure.
It's like those are not even the kind of arguments. It's not an argument. Those are not the kind of things you want to be talking about. What's that saying is, I'm not serious about this situation, and I'm trying to attempt to sound serious. Anyway, I got to get off that soapbox, because I'll drive that right into the ground.
I think what we've done is we've demonstrated for our listeners why we are calling this podcast "Things I Gotta Say."
Oh yeah,
right. Because we don't want to diminish or minimize or make light of this pandemic, this coronavirus, the COVID-19 that's going on. It is horrible, and there are many lives that are affected. In fact, Jordan and I both had a video meeting this morning with someone that is actually recovering from an infection right now. Someone that we know actually is out of state. We haven't had physical contact with him. I'll say that just to make everyone know that we're not exposed.
So you're not going to get coronavirus by listening to this podcast.
No, but so we know that there's a lot of people that are impacted and affected by this, and those that are most at risk, the elderly, and those whose immune systems have been compromised or weakened for whatever reason. I don't want to make light of it, but it's not just that. I mean, it's affecting, people in the world in other ways, and we've mentioned a few of them here so far. And not the least of which is it creates some really strong uh, opinions and points of view on data points, as Jordan had mentioned earlier, as you said earlier, not information per se, but data points that people take and turn into information.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. My wife's mother and father live with us, and we live in a neighborhood, and there's lots of houses, and she's heard so much on the television about, the coronavirus, and she's scared, and she sees people out walking in our neighborhood, and she's freaking out a little bit about why are they outside. I mean, that's the effect it's having on people. They're getting this untold message that, to social distance, that they can't even go outside in some cases, and that's the worst thing in the world. They probably need to go outside to get, air and sunshine and exercise and things of that sort that would be helpful, obviously keeping a good safe distance from other people. But out in the neighborhood on a walking trail or a walking track, up and down the sidewalks, you should be able to have plenty of distance to stay away from people. And I think the risks are certainly overwhelmed by the positives of the fresh air and sunshine and the free vitamin D that someone can get just being outside for 10 or 15 minutes. But anyway, that's one of the things I had to say in that regard.
I
So
think
Jordan,
it probably behooves us to mention that this is being recorded April 23rd, 2020, because I realize we're referring to some potentially time sensitive, not time sensitive, but time specific things.
Right.
And in 2 weeks, this may sound really silly, so just so
Sure.
everyone's aware.
Yeah.
But
in
no,
2020.
right. Yeah. I think that I think we've pretty well covered it, and I think that kind of leads into some of the other things that that we wanted to talk about. Particularly, you're mentioning your mother-in-law. It's one of those things where it's unfortunate that the media has pumped such a level of fear into people, and I'm not saying there doesn't need to be genuine, serious concern. By no means am I saying that, but fear, even if we take the worst view that has been presented in media anywhere about this thing and say that's the 100% truth. Even if we say that, fear is not helpful in that situation. Fear is always a destructive force and always counterproductive to positive ends. That's been at least my experience. That's my opinion on it, because you have people, when they get afraid, they make decisions that aren't well thought out generally, because they are afraid. They got to do something. They need to feel like they're addressing what's in front of them and trying to overcome it. And that's human nature, and it's understandable that they would be that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of the media out there now are taking advantage of the ability. I don't think this is true. The media is taking advantage of their ability to rile up fear. That was happening long before this pandemic began, and I suspect it'll be happening long after. But certainly, this is a situation that has laid it completely bare that the media is a machine of fear. I mean, that's what it almost seems like its job is to create fear among people. I don't know, Dole, what do you think about that?
I think so. I mean, because when, as you were saying that, I remember I'm thinking of a couple of news programs that I watch from time to time, and they have to make it a point at the end of the show, at the end of their 30-minute time frame, to come up with something positive, something uplifting, to try to counteract all of this fear and you want to say negativity, but I mean, when they're reporting things that are occurring, that's not necessarily negativity
as it's much negativity as when it gets cast in a certain way, though, right? I mean, because that often happens.
Right, when they wrap a certain intentional message with the facts that they're reporting, right? When they make it more political than they should, even not even talking about the political side. And this is the thing that is wildest to me, is television shows, any standard program, non-news program, entertainment show of some sort, right? Their whole idea is to attract viewers, right? And the reason they want to attract viewers is so that they can sell advertising. And the more viewers they can attract, and the certain demographics that they can attract, they can, target certain advertisers and have them pay fees. News programs do the same thing. The problem with that is that creates a conflict between a factual, unbiased reporting of news events and putting up something that people will want to see and want to tune in for. They're competing for the quote unquote eyeballs across networks and across channels and delivery avenues, however the news is delivered. And it's I won't say sad, but it seems fighting what news used to be once upon a time.
Well, no, it's
Right.
sad. I think you can say it's sad because, and this is going pretty deep on this topic, but the reality of it is, it's not just fear. Fear is the base of what I think most media is playing at.
Mm-hmm.
The sad part about it is that it is almost painfully clear that the way in which particular media sources present their news or programs or whatever it is, articles, makes it very clear that they are speaking to a specific tribalistic mindset, right? So at some point I would probably say some media channels, but I want to just get a general point out here, because if it's on TV, they're doing this. If it's on in print and it gets delivered to your front door, they're doing this. No matter where anywhere on the political landscape that any particular outlet may lie, they're doing this. But that's the thing, is that, to your point, I think, is that the way that they know that they can capture those eyeballs, those clicks, etc., that watch time for ads is by appealing to the things that really light people up, that will cause them to click, keep their attention longer, etc., on these specific media sources. And so it's really this huge de-evolution into tribalistic reporting, tribalistic programs, tribalistic articles, etc., where it's like, okay, yeah, I know the 3 words that I can say in this article that are going to really light you up and make you read the whole thing, or like that the newscaster can say in the first 10 seconds of his intro, that's going to hook you for this whole thing. And like I said, it doesn't matter if you're on the right, left, up, down, inside, out, red, white, blue, yellow, orange, pink. All of the media outlets do this in varying degrees. Some are way worse than others, and many are really bad. But I really think that's the sad part, is that kind of reversion to tribalism in a way.
To support a part of your point, closed captioning is a pretty interesting feature sometimes. I've been watching this. It was a local news station, one of the national networks. It's the local station for that, and you will see some of the commentary around not just what they say in closed caption, like it'll say stinger, for this such and such story.
It's like placeholder,
the teaser. I mean, so you see this, so they're unabashed with it, right?
It's certainly planned. Yeah,
it's not like, and I will age myself here shortly if I don't watch out. When I was growing up, even as a teenager and a young adult, you tuned in to see the news, not to be entertained. You tuned in to see what was going on. People, those of us that have been around a decade or 5 or 6, no Walter Cronkite, right? And he was very trustworthy. And back until he fell from grace, Dan Rather, right, was another that they were well known for just factually reporting the news and didn't appear to comment about it, put in their opinion, unless they said, this was an opinion, which was rare. And you don't see that now. It's interwoven with facts and opinion, and so the lines are blurred.
Yeah, and I think that I think there's even argument to be made that earlier Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite even, they still had a perspective injected into what they reported.
Oh sure, oh sure,
right? If for in no other way in the language in which it was constructed, and language is very important. There's a lot of subconscious clues often in the way the sentences are structured, and I think that, and I don't mean to say this to get very conspiratorial about it. I just mean that people have things that they're trying to achieve with the work that they do, and it doesn't have to be nefarious at all, and it doesn't have to be disingenuous, and it doesn't have to be quote unquote bad, right? I mean, it's just these things are the case, and so it's really hard. And this goes back to my statement at the beginning about trying to take in information or at least reporting and data from a bunch of different sources, is because you're not going to be able to go to one source and be able to get a 100% objectively fact-based, dispassionate piece of information about the world.
Right.
Period. That doesn't. Sure. You can go to a multi-peer-reviewed scientific journal, and you're not going to get that. Right.
Sure.
So if you can't get it there, you're not getting it anywhere.
Right.
And so the people really, I think, need to be aware of that when they're trying to consume information about the world something they didn't see or they don't have direct experience with. Definitely, you need to consume that information, right? You need to know about things that are outside of you. That makes you a more well-rounded, richer person. Although I have to say, though, the idea of wanting to be fully well-rounded is a little suspect to me, because the more that I try to be more well-rounded in a lot of different things, the more I realize I'm not that great at anything. And I know the jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing, but I think that there's some deep importance in understanding things at a really deep level and being limited. Not that everyone should, but I think some people should. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's a different topic.
Right.
But yeah, I think that just generally, a lot of people say, "Oh, you need to think." People aren't thinking. People don't have their brains engaged. People's minds are closed. This, that, and the other. And yes, maybe those things are true to a degree. But I think the reality is most people just don't understand that they have to engage themselves with that type of thing. When I'm trying to look at the news, when I'm trying to learn about the world around me, not just learn, but understand about current events or whatever, you have to be engaged in that process. You can't just be like an open container and have it poured into you, I guess is the point I'm trying to make.
So you can't. I started to naming networks, but I'm not going to do that. I mean, on both sides of the equation, if you will. But even if you are listening to one that is more aligned with your
personal bias, everybody has personal bias. I mean, that's just the truth.
Even then, I think what you're saying is probably even more. Because otherwise, you're I think a term I've heard you use before. You create your own echo chamber.
Yep.
Where you have what you think and what you think you believe reinforced by the message that keeps coming at you, and then it just sort of creates this spiral, in the echo chamber, idea, and it serves well. And this is why some of the people that I have gained some of the most respect for in the world today are the people that are most willing to listen to other people's points of view.
Yeah.
Right. And that's too infrequent these days, where number one, people are willing to listen, but then number two, that people are willing to openly engage with someone for a an educated discussion and or debate rather than immediately going on an attack. And I think I'm segueing away from the media and don't mean to, but into the personal philosophies and points of view that
Yeah.
are framed or influenced by what we think we see and what we believe are in the media uh, in all forms today.
I think kind of riffing off of that a little bit, talking about your the I won't say reticence to discourse, but I think a lot of people just don't understand how to have a
Right.
real debate, a real dialogue about an important topic. I think that it's been modeled for them so much, particularly in the media, but even elsewhere, that the way to get through a debate is to beat down your opponent. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, that's not what it's about. And if you think that that's what it's about, then you're never going to learn anything in your
Right.
life, like ever. And I think that it's sad because I feel like that there's some schools of thought that really I genuinely honestly believe that they are so right about where they're at that they can't allow any other perspective to be spoken, because just the fact that that other perspective is being spoken is tantamount to disproving them.
Right.
Now's not the time to go into some of those. At some point, I would like to talk about some of those, but it's pretty low level as far as I guess human philosophies. But that's sad, and I don't ever want to be associated with any such philosophy that is so scared to engage in debate that it doesn't even it thinks that it shouldn't even exist,
Sure.
or at least acts like it shouldn't exist.
I think what you just spoke there, over the last couple of topics or topic points, again goes into the case of explaining to our listeners why we felt the need to begin this podcast. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we have some beef with anything or anybody or any group. We're going to get on a stump and not that I'm not against, not that I have a problem with getting on a stump from time to time, but that's not the objective here.
Yeah.
It's to talk about these points that sort of burn within us from time to time, and to hope to create some discourse, to create some dialogue, some additional
Absolutely.
dialogue, and not just be talking heads, but to introduce new thoughts, new thinking, new perspectives, and be able to take those and to make situations and circumstances and life and people and situations better than they were before, not to make them worse. And I've been in this world and in this country and long enough to know that there are some fantastic and brilliant and caring people in this world.
Yes.
They're not just limited to the United States, although I'm kind of particular to the most of the people there. But I think we've got to be careful and aware that it's I don't. Here's another topic I don't want to get into, but on universalism, I'm not into this one world view of everything. I think there's good reason to have groups. That's why we have families, right?
Sure.
There's protection, there's strength, and but that doesn't mean it's all or nothing, and wars and battles if you're not part of that group. And I think that's where we want to avoid things like that, to find the common ground and coexist in the best way and that we can possible.
I mean, and again, this is definitely a topic for maybe even an entire podcast at some point. But that's purely my point of view. Is that, like, if you could distill my point of view down to one statement, 2 words: voluntary interaction. That's it. Everything should be voluntary interaction, no coercion, right? That if you take that approach to everything in life, you will find that people, the good that people think is void, that doesn't exist. There, I think that there's a lot of people that think that humans are basically evil and despicable, and I think those people are so misled by people who are truly evil and do despicable things, and then they those people are put either get into positions somehow of authority, power, etc., and then the perspective is that they are in that position because they are evil and do despicable things, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Because there's as many examples as there are of that. I can give you, for every one example like that, I can give you a dozen counter examples where somebody in the exact same kind of a position is one of the best humans you'll ever talk to. I can guarantee it. And if we could shift the perspective of those people away from, evil is the default state of man, to, well, no, evil does exist and evil does exist in man, but that's not the default state, and we need to know that no one's beyond redemption. Mm-hmm. If we could take that sort of a view of things, then we could actually start genuinely and earnestly working toward a better world. But I think as long as the prevailing sentiment is that man is by default evil and does by default despicable things, we got a long road to hoe to get there.
So your 2-word statement of philosophy again was
voluntary interaction.
Voluntary interaction. Honestly, that sounds like a really good place for us to wrap up the podcast tonight, because that's a nice teaser for not that we'll necessarily talk about that on our next one, but I do think that's, as you said, that's going to be one that I think will open some doors of, I got to say a bunch of stuff, in a positive way, right? And
for sure,
in an open and honest way, right? So I really enjoyed tonight, Jordan. I think we've gotten this thing off to a really good start. Hopefully, we've given folks an indication of kind of where our heads and hearts are. I really probably should have flipped that and said where our hearts and heads are, because I think I can speak for you that on this topic, we start from the heart first in anything that we do and say, and we like these kinds of conversations. We've had many of these beyond count before, and I look forward to many more going forward.
Same here, Doyle. It was a good time. I appreciate you taking the time with me, and I guess we will talk again soon.
All right.
All right. See ya.
Till next time.